Good evening. Word of explanation about the pictures. I was asked to supply some visual images, and I'm a writer, not a painter. And also my book is about painting, but not only painting. So I compromised by supplying some photographs I've taken that I like, and don't get too distracted by them. Yes, it's all slightly experimental. Normally when I hear the word experimental, I start edging for the door, but in this case, we just let this happen. So thank you for that introduction. Yes, my interest is in the experience of enchantment. I try and keep close to the actual experience of enchantment before getting swept away by theory, although theory will have its say at some point or another. And I think it is a very, actually in its own subtle way, important human experience that has rather been neglected. I should say right away, I have absolutely no interest in explaining it. I do seek to understand it better, and perhaps I can help you understand it better, and the better to appreciate it and honor it, as was said a moment ago. So I'm going to talk about, first of all, enchantment itself. Just tell you some things, how I think it, what I think it is and how it works to some extent. And then I'm going to go on to enchantment in and as art. And then perhaps we'll see what's left over. I've got some things on pieces of paper for what's left, I might have left out by accident. So as I say, my interest is in enchantment and the question what it is. Having attended a few academic conferences in my time speaking on this subject, I was surprised to find that so few people at these conferences were actually interested in what it is. They wanted something they could do something with. They wanted an idea they could use. That's not what I'm about. So let's go straight on to what is enchantment. And then, of course, that includes the question, what is not enchantment? Because it's an equally important way to understand it is by what it is not. So I'll be touching on that. The heart of enchantment is wonder, sheer existential wonder, which at extreme moments stops you in your tracks, or your mouth falls open, or you stop breathing for a moment, or to quote somebody I know, nothing happened, but everything has changed. It only occurs in moments of enchantment. Now, that said, these moments, to quote an artist, a Lebanese artist, Etel Adnan, these moments are short but deep. And while they're happening, time can slow right down to almost stopping. And the little place it's happening in can become a very large place indeed. Nonetheless, sooner or later, it passes, which I'll be coming back to. There's intensities of enchantment. The lowest level, and none the worse for that, is charming. What a charming person I've just met, what a charming restaurant we're in, charming piece of music, whatever, that's fine. Up a step is delight. And I don't say pleasure because it's quite a different quality to pleasure. Pleasure, I think, it seems to me, has something, is sort of about me, whoever the me is. Delight is more disinterested and sharper. It's lighter than pleasure, but sharper. It can be almost painful delight. And finally, to full-blown enchantment, or what I call radical enchantment, which doesn't happen very often in a lifetime. 1 or 2, 3 times, if you're lucky. And that's what I associate with joy. And deep enchantment, radical enchantment can be, of course, can be life-changing. It can actually change your life. Now you will notice that, charm, delight, joy. Now, since we are a remarkable animal, the human animal, and I have no problem with saying we are a spiritual animal, we do have commonalities of where these experiences tend to happen. They tend to happen in certain contexts more than others. And the classic contexts are love. An absolutely classic instance of enchantment, of course, is falling in love. I think I'm going to assume that's pretty obvious. But also food and drink. And by food, I mean real food, sourced from somewhere that carries a story. So the food has stories in it of where it's from and how it was grown and who cooked it and how they cooked it with love and skill. And perhaps it's shared convivially. That's very enchanting, very important source of enchantment in our lives, not to be despised by any means. Religion, especially in religious ritual. The ritual you're doing that connects you with other people you'll never meet all over the world and people back in time, hundreds of years. That's powerfully and can be powerfully enchanting. Nature. In a sense, every experience of enchantment is natural because we experience it as an embodied, embedded ecological being. But there are specifically experiences of nature which are important, a crucial part of many, many people's lives. This particular walk, this grove of trees, this stream. You'll notice I'm emphasizing the particularity of enchantment. That is very important. It's not an ineffable state in which you are carried off to some other realm or heaven. It's always very situated. Okay, but the mystery of this exact circumstances is profound. Okay, so it's not. I'll come back to this point probably. It's not transcendence. Enchantment, whatever else it is not transcendence in the sense of rising above or circumstances or leaving them behind. On the contrary, it's a matter of going into the circumstances in which you find yourself more deeply. So it's a kind of internal transcendence. Okay. You will notice that, so I'm going to let me give one example of radical enchantment. There'll be others when we come to art, okay? Gosh, is that the time already? Oh dear. Okay, here's an example of a form of enchantment that I call address. Somebody who I know well was bemoaning her 60th birthday coming up and feeling very old, as one does when the first digit changes. And walking in London and noticed a bright turquoise blue balloon overhead that somebody had let go of and it was proceeding in the same direction. Didn't think much of it. But when she got to the park she was walking to, there it was in the pond, and it was trailing strings. And being a kind person, she was worried about the ducklings coming entangled in the strings. So she managed to reach into the pond and grab the balloon, turned it around, and it said, "Happy 60th birthday." Now, we can learn a lot from this experience. It could never have been arranged. Okay? It's not under anybody's control. It wasn't managed or stage managed or produced to have a certain effect or at all. It's impossible to do that. At that moment, the cosmic, because the cosmos was speaking to her, to a very intimate personal concern. The cosmos and your particular position or being touch, meet, and that's often something that is accompanied by enchantment. So say it's an experience of existential wonder. What does that mean? It's not. It's not a matter of will in the sense of the will to power, knowledge, system, program, outcomes, targets. No, absolutely the antithesis of all those things, particularly will. When you're in a state of wonder, you cannot will. And when you're willing something, i.e. you trying to make something happen, you cannot be in a state of wonder. The two are what technically called immiscible, like oil and water. Now they can be entangled in circumstances, absolutely. And every artist knows the amount of sheer, bloody willpower it takes to produce art which hopefully will enchant somebody. So they are entangled, but even so, while that's happening, they remain distinct. Wonder is distinct from will. It follows that if you accept a definition of modernity by a philosopher I like, called Val Plumwood, an ecofeminist philosopher, that by extension, modernity is, she said, the project of modernity is the mastery, the rational mastery of nature. The rational mastery of nature, including human nature. Well, we see that all the time. We're surrounded by this project. So it follows, I think, and I think it is true, that wonder, the wonder of enchantment, is non-modern. Now note, it is not postmodern, because, and it's not pre-modern. There was never a time in the world, I dare say, when everything and everyone was enchanted. That's a fantasy. There were always grim realities. Now, enchantment is, an endangered species in many ways, but it still happens. People are still falling in love, having terrific meals with friends, being swept away by a piece of music. So it's neither post nor pre-modern. It is non-modern. So modernity as a project cannot get its head around enchantment. It's like, what? It just doesn't compute, and therefore either doesn't take it seriously or regards it as a threat. Why would modernity regard enchantment as a threat? Because it kind of indicates the limits of the modernist project. There is something important that it will never get to. That leaves, to quote Ital Adnan again, enchantment in the position of being vulnerable but indestructible, which is lovely. Now, the non-modern thing. Even when a state of wonder is precipitated by something modern, and here I always think of John Betjeman looking up at the roof, the ceiling and the roof of St. Pancras Station. And of course, he's one who's responsible for preventing it from being knocked down, from starting the campaign to prevent it from being knocked down and destroyed and replaced by something much more like Euston. He was in a state of wonder at a modern thing, but nonetheless, the state he was in was itself non-modern. Now, another perspective on enchantment is the word. Enchantment comes from Old French, enchantement, which comes from Latin, which means literally to be in a song, to be in singing. And how this works out, particularly with respect to art, is very interesting, because many, perhaps not all, but many moments of enchantment by art take the form of you finding yourself in the song you are hearing, or in the song you are singing, and simultaneously finding the song in you. Okay? Or with art, with visual art, finding yourself in the picture that you're looking at. Also outside the picture, I mean, you're standing in a room looking at a picture. That doesn't stop. But at the same time, you're in the picture, looking at things in the picture around you. Music, I think being swept away is a phrase that I associate with powerful music, the effect of musical enchantment. But swept away to where? I think it may be swept away to the heart of where you actually are. By the living music, obviously it's not alive in the sense of a biological organism, but by God it is alive in some other metaphysical and important way. Obviously I'll come back to that. So you will have noticed that so far that enchantment is fundamentally relational. It's always an encounter. That means it's not just a state of mind. It's not just psychological. It's not just a condition of the world. It's always both these things, precipitated by an encounter. You are in wonder at someone or something. You are enchanted by someone or something. Okay, so a great deal rests on this fact of it being relational. And not only is it relational, but the more intense it gets, the more reciprocal it gets. So even when the enchanting other is, as I say, technically not alive, that's not important, because it manifests agency and subjectivity and is apprehending you at the same time that you're apprehending it. And I'll give you an example of that later. In this sense, the sense of relationship, let me just say something about relationship for a moment. In a real relationship, nobody is in charge. Not you, nor the other. Because how and what I do is in response to what you do, but I'm not controlling what you do, so I have to, and so it goes like this, okay? It's recursive. If somebody in a relationship is in charge of the relationship, it's not a relationship. It's more of a master-slave thing, sort of dynamic. It follows from this that relationships are fundamentally wild, in very much the senses of a wild nature or a wild animal, okay? Suppose you live in the countryside and you want to establish some sort of relationship with a deer that comes to your garden. Well, you have to approach the whole thing very gingerly, very carefully, very respectfully. If you capture the deer and force it to interact with you, I'm sorry, it's not wild anymore. Okay? So you've failed to learn whatever this being had to see you, to teach you in the interaction. So wildness, there's sort of an elective affinity then between the wildness of wonder and the wildness of the natural world, which may be why the two tend to go together very often. The best attitude to have in this situation was a phrase by Freya Stark, a very wonderful English travel writer of the early last century. Fearless receptivity. That's what she advocated. Fearless receptivity. And that captures something very, very important, I think. Now, in this encounter that I'm speaking of takes place over across a gap of differences, which is bridged by the encounter. The differences between you or me and the other don't vanish. Actually, without differences and boundaries and limits, there can be no gaps. And without gaps, there can be no enchantment. So it's very, very important, those gaps. But they're not all determining anymore. They don't determine everything. They're not ruling you, okay? They're transcended. In order to be transcended, they have to be there. Or as W.H. Auden said, before there can be one, there must be two. That follows from the relationality of it. So one word we might use, a bit overused sometimes to describe enchantment, is it's liminal. It's neither one nor the other, but it's in between the two, the agent, the human subject, and the enchanting other. Okay, the enchantment lives in the gaps between things. There's therefore two modes of human existence, and this has direct relevance to art, which are inimical to enchantment, which it really just doesn't like and won't stick around for. In a way, two extremes. One extreme is Dionysian, I'm going to call Dionysian. And in this extreme, everything is a sort of orgasmic unity. All differences and boundaries and limits are obliterated. There's just one kind of roiling soup. In fact, there isn't anything because there's no one to know what it is. There's no one left to know what it is. Now, some art is very Dionysian in this way, and it is not usually enchanting. The other extreme is what I call Apollonian, and that is where the differences, the boundaries, are everything. And the person, the individual, is totally in charge, and it's a very cold. I mean, the Dionysian thing is very hot. The Apollonian thing is very cold. It's about mastery, rulership. I am stronger than you, ruling you. It's quite Nietzschean in that way. And it's very rational in the sense of a means to an end, okay? It's very instrumental. And to do that, the Dionysian person has to turn everybody else and everything else into an object, even if they are apparently subjects. They have to be objectified in order to be ruled, okay? These two modes, in art, that would be, well, I always think, for example, of Mondrian's late abstracts, which are 2 lines, horizontal, vertical, 3 primary colors. That's it. You're not allowed anything else. And they always look like prison bars to me. Maybe my failing. Anyway, at any rate, these are not conducive to enchantment. Now, another angle on enchantment is a phrase by Max Weber. He called it concrete magic. They're moments of concrete magic. And that refers back to what I was saying earlier, that enchantment is not a mystical and more ineffable state of nothing in particular. It's always very situated. In the case of art, it would be this moment in this room in front of this painting, never to be repeated. Because if you repeat it, you won't be the same person doing it, because you will have been changed by your first encounter. And going into the circumstances in a sort of internal transcendence that I've already mentioned. So that means that enchantment is against our training, our centuries and thousands of years of intellectual, moral, and religious training to ask these questions. Is this spiritual or is it material? Is it psychological or is it physical? Is it subjective or is it objective? These are destructive questions in the context of wonder. Don't know if you know the psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott, but he was very good on this. And he started off with the soft toy of a child, you know. The one thing you must never ask in any form, he said, of the child is this you or is this something else? Because the only possible answer is, it's both. It's both. And a work of art is both subjective and objective. You need both poles. It's material and it's also spiritual. There is no necessary contradiction here. But we have this impetus to we've been trained to ask these questions. If you can avoid it, I would recommend it. Is it transcendent or is it immanent? Is it personal or is it cosmic? Yes, both and, both and, both and. So academics and intellectuals sometimes extend this program by a series of reductions of enchantment. They sometimes reduce it up to God. Now, that doesn't necessarily need to be a problem. None of these reductions need to be reductionist if you can use them to sympathetically illuminate the experience itself. But if you're interested in the experience itself and its distinctiveness, its particularity, then these are usually problematic moves. Reducing it up to God, reducing it down to neurophysiology, very popular these days. Can't go on the internet without finding articles by the latest Stanford University physio guy saying it's this neuron or that synapse or whatever. Sometimes they reduce it sideways to something they do feel they understand better, usually the sublime. I think, oh, I don't know what I'm doing with wonder. Okay, we'll call it the sublime. Now I know where I am because I've read this book and that book. These also are to be resisted if possible. Right. It's not an experience ultimately of falling into a dream, falling under a spell. Being enchanted is not a spell. It's a waking up. Very often it's a moment of waking up from the true modernist's spell, which is one of ultimately despair. You've seen one, you've seen them all. it's all the same, nothing new can ever happen, etc., etc. That we are, these lies are whispered in our ears constantly. So it's an experience of waking up from that. And it's an experience of truth. What truth? The true value, the intrinsic value of the enchanting other, the enchanting party. Okay, which value cannot be captured by any form of calculation, let alone monetary calculation. How much is my true love worth? I don't think so. It doesn't work that way. So an experience of truth, and ultimately the truth that the experiences of enchantment are experiences of the truth and of the intrinsic value of life, of being alive. Because enchantment and the wonder of enchantment is always ultimately an experience and an appreciation of being alive. And as such, they mitigate moments of enchantment, mitigate strongly against the sort of romanticization and aestheticization of death that we find in a lot of modern culture. Silicon Valley, in order to try and live forever, these mad people, they destroy the quality of life that we have while we are alive. They think they can extend that forever just by living on and on forever. What Tolkien called endless serial living, which is, he said, not immortality. If there is any immortality, it's on the other side of death. So you end up with endless serial living, you end up like a ring wraith, which is to say, longing to die and terrified of dying at the same time. Enchantment works against that very strongly, very subtly, but you can't use it to combat these attitudes. You can't use it to re-enchant the world. It's not a tool. Okay, it's not under your control. There are things you can do, which I'll get back to. Finally, I think it's important to emphasize that enchantment always passes. It's not, if you are enchanted 24/7, you're probably psychotic. It's the nature of the thing to pass. And the contrast is perhaps made clearest in somewhere, I think in John, Gospel of John, Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well, and he says to her, if you drink of the water that I bring you, you will never thirst again. Beyond my pay scale to comment on that. It may well be true, but it's not true of enchantment. It's not true of wonder. It will pass. And then the test becomes, can you let go? Now, it's better if you can let go. That's an irony about enchantment. It doesn't need a weak ego. It needs a strong ego to be able to let go and to be able to find yourself again in what Tolkien called the gray and leafless world. Because if you can't let go, well, it will be taken from you anyway. It will go. So it's a different kind of animal there. I should say something briefly about disenchantment. Can't talk about enchantment without saying anything about disenchantment. I don't want to go on too long about it. I'll be very brief. There is normal, daily, Monday morning, 9 a.m. disenchantment. Nothing wrong with that as such. I mean, it's not fun, but it's just a fact of life. Secondly, there are places, I am convinced, on the planet which are fundamentally disenchanted and disenchanting places. And I don't mean cities even, I mean natural places. There's quite a few of them in the part of the world where I come from, the Midwest of Canada, that is to say in the north of the Midwest of Canada. There's places that perhaps I would look at them differently if I was Indigenous and I would apprehend their inner meaning and so forth, but that door is closed to me. Thirdly, and perhaps most significantly, there is programmatic disenchantment, deliberate disenchantment. There's engines of disenchantment, okay? So disenchantment is a tool employed by what I call the mega machine, which consists of the state, capital, big capital, big money, and technoscience. Okay, why would this beast, this rough beast, the mega machine, have an interest in us in disenchanting us? Because if you're really disenchanted, you can't understand the idea of intrinsic value. Nothing has any intrinsic value anymore. Therefore, everything can be reduced to a calculus, an instrumental calculus, usually of financial value. It can be commodified, it can be sold off. So enchantment is, one way to paraphrase enchantment is to say, not for sale. Sorry, not for sale under any circumstances, no matter how much money you offer me. Well, that's a problem for the mega machine. It really doesn't want people doing that sort of thing. It wants clients and customers who understand the game and are willing to play the game. So modernity is deliberately disenchanting. And one of the ways it does that is it creates a simulacrum of enchantment, which is pliable, which does what it's told. I call it glamour. This is the stuff of the advertising industry and spin, political spin. Advertising industry, I mean, Google and all that, they're advertising companies. And we're talking billions of pounds, their budget is, billions of pounds, okay? So that's a third kind of disenchantment, which I don't want to say anything more about, partly because it's too depressing, but it's a reality. Now look, art, now, can finally get onto art and enchantment. First of all, I don't think enchantment exhausts the importance of art. There can be great art that isn't enchanting. Some examples that usually occur to me, Picasso's Guernica. It's not enchanting, but it's very powerful and moving. Jimi Hendrix's solo when he plays the Star Spangled Banner, and you can hear the rockets and the machine guns. Just mentioning it, I'm getting choked up. Let's see. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. I don't think it's enchanting, but it's a very significant work of literary art, and so on. Okay, so I don't think it's everything. First and secondly, in my book, I'm only concerned because I'm a limited person. I'm only concerned with painting, music, and fiction. Okay, none of the other arts. I could almost sum up art and enchantment by quoting something that W.H. Auden said, which I will. Every encounter with a work of art is a personal encounter. We've seen that so far already, yeah? What it says is not information, but a revelation, the truth angle, of itself, which is simultaneously a revelation of ourselves. End quote. It's a great quote, doesn't leave a lot out. So when he says it's not information, what this means, one thing this points to, is that art is not about representing, in my opinion, and with an orientation to wonder. Art is not about representing anything. But it's also not about not representing anything. So if it was about representing, the better, the more accurate, let's say, the image, the representation of something in the primary world would be, the better art it would be. I don't think that follows. But it's also to criticize, to attack that and say, no, it should be about abstraction. We must get rid of things. That's not true either. That's to buy into the same mistake. What art is about, then? Can't believe I've got the nerve to say things like this, but never mind. In my opinion, what art is about is presenting. It's about presence, not representation, but presence. It presents something new about the world. It adds something new to the world. Okay? When you encounter an enchanting work of art, you are aware of its presence. You are encountering its presence. And in that process, you are learning something about it, as Auden says, and something about yourself. I'll give an example of that later. I've already mentioned the paradox of the paradoxical nature of enchantment, in that you find yourself in the picture that you're looking at, in the music that you're hearing, in the story that you're reading. I remember very clearly as a teenager reading Peer Gynt, absolutely gripped and rapt as I turned the pages to find out what was going to happen to me next. I was Peer, and Peer was me. Now, I also wasn't Peer, and it's important to remember that. I'm not a literary fictional character. But at the same time, I was, and when that happened. So it feels fateful, you know. It was, my encounter with Peer Gynt was fateful, because it was, whatever happened to him was going to have some effect on my fate. And art can do this, okay? We all know that works of art are not biologically alive, but they tend to come alive. Maybe I'll skip to this example I was going to give you. This is from my book. Concerns a painting by an artist called Ivan Hitchens, English artist. On the 14th of September 2019, I took a day trip from London to Chichester to see an exhibition of paintings by Hitchens. I had the persistent feeling there was something waiting for me there. And sure enough, as I turned the corner into one of the rooms, there it was, unmistakable, this particular painting, no other, called Iron Bridge over the Rother, a river. It reached out and pulled me in, even while I remained in a room in a provincial but excellent art gallery. Time literally instantly slowed down. The way that happens. I think perhaps you've had that experience from time to time. And even tears started. Now, his bridge, what kind of relationship did his bridge bear to the real, which is ridiculous because they're all real, everything's real, to the primary bridge that he was painting? Same sort of relationship. I don't know if you've ever seen any of Bonnard's paintings of Martha in the bath, lying in the bath in this bathroom, which is an antechamber of heaven. I mean, it's luminous blue and gold and pulsing blobs of light and so on. I once saw a photograph of the bathroom, and it's like, oh, it's really not like that in the photograph anyway. Well, Hitchens Bridge is the same sort of thing. So what had happened? I think what happened is that Hitchens had, as an artist, imaginatively apprehended the lining and depth or the meaning of that particular place. And as a painter, he had the will and skill to present it to us transformed into what it could be. So in grasping that, now this is important, I think, in grasping that enchanted reality through looking at the painting, the viewer engages in the same process as the artist, not only perceiving the daubs and swirls of paint on canvas, but their lining and their depth. And that takes the viewer of the painting into the same place and moment that the artist was when he painted it. Another weird thing that happens to time in enchantment. Afterwards, I was aware of not being quite the same person I had been. I had the feeling, distinct feeling of having been called to that gallery by the painting, and the radical enchantment is evident. I can't explain it rationally, okay? But explanation in this context, I think, is so much whistling in the dark anyway. That's what Nietzsche suggested. It's an attempt to be comfortable. Yeah. If you refuse the enchantment, by the way, the fateful moment, if you refuse it, which you can do, it takes a huge effort of will to do that. Say, no, I'm not going to go over and talk to that person. No, I'm not going to listen to this music, whatever. It's still fateful. because then you become a person who had that chance and refused it. And you will stay that person for the rest of your life. So it's fateful no matter how you look at it. Let's see. There's a lot of Apollonian art of icy mastery and control over the other. I think of not only Mondrian's late abstracts, but Schoenberg's serial, 12-tone serialism. It's a very good example, I think. There's a lot of Dionysian art, Jackson Pollock's paintings, arguably Wagner's operas, definitely so-called free jazz, which tries to do without structure whatsoever, and it doesn't work. I portray part of my narrative of art, Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp, as a sort of evil genius who set out to actually destroy art. And his student in music was John Cage, who tried to do the same thing. And they tried to not eliminate, just destroy boundaries between art and life. But what happens then is not that everything becomes artistic, but that art loses what is distinctive about it and becomes part of the general melee of 24/7 reality. So I'm not big fans of that program. Can you use art to change anything? This is an old debate. Well, maybe you can. I rather doubt it. But if you do, it won't be an exercise in enchantment, and it won't be the wonder of the art that makes the difference. Auden was very scathing about this idea. He said, poetry makes nothing happen. Of course, Shelley boasted, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, which I think is really pompous. But anyway, the truth is somewhere in between. Art does make things happen. Things can change as a result of art, but not in any way that anyone can control or direct. So Yeats, in a poem Muses, did that play of mine send out certain men the English shot? Probably, and that's not what he intended at all. So it can make things happen, but not to order. Let me just say something about the project of re-enchanting the world. Deeply problematic. First of all, it assumes that the world is already disenchanted. You're going to concede that? I'm not going to concede that. And it's factually ridiculous as well. Secondly, it assumes that there can be a program of re-enchantment. No, there can't, because program destroys enchantment. You can't have both. There are things you can do, so I don't want to sound too negative, because I'll get back to them. If you successfully re-enchanted the world, if everybody suddenly became universally enchanted, well, in the first place, obviously that's never going to happen. But if you had, the state of mind that everybody would be in would not be enchanted. It would be the result of a program of some kind in the name of enchantment. Can you imagine enchantment targets being met? And enchantment objectives? It's crazy. It's crazy. What you can do, you can be open as a matter of principle, as a principled habit. You can be open to agency and subjectivity as you go through life, wherever you encounter it, whenever, as a result of whom. Suppose you are having a particularly numinous or charged walk in the woods, and you encounter a rock, a stone of some kind with a peculiar shape, and you feel like it's trying to tell you something. Don't go, oh, don't be silly, that's just a rock. It's not alive. It can't possibly tell me anything. I must be projecting something from my unconscious onto the rock. That's what I call modernist self-policing, and it just destroys the wonder. And who does that benefit? It doesn't benefit anybody, certainly not you or the rock, by the way. So if you encounter agency and subjectivity, listen up. Try and find out what it's got to tell you, what you have to learn from it. That's something you can do. You can encourage enchantment, usually or very often in your work, whatever your field of work is, by creating the conditions that it favors. You can't make it happen. I mean, we all know, for example, you can have somebody's making a movie. They have a great script. They have a great cast. They have lots of funding. It's a total flop and nobody likes it. This happens all the time. But you can create the conditions that enchantment favors. That is to say, not Dionysian, not madness, not Apollonian, hyper-control, micromanaging. Enchantment hates micromanaging. But somewhere in between, which is sort of that liminal, that delicate balance between limitations and conditions and boundaries and openness to creativity. Okay, so something new can happen. That's something you can do. Those are two things you can do. If you're going to think about it, you can think about it respectfully and carefully, which is what I try and do. Now I'm winding down. Got a couple of things, maybe a couple of things left to read very, very quickly. This is a little snippet from C.S. Lewis in an interesting book called An Experiment in Criticism, 1961. We are so busy doing things with the work that we give it too little chance to work on us. Increasingly, therefore, we meet only ourselves. So academics in particular seems like a terror of being fooled, of looking foolish, of being taken in. But sorry, with enchantment, you have to take that risk. And if it turns out that you have made a mistake, so be it. But if you foreclose by defending yourself, by being so well defended in terms of what is called the hermeneutics of suspicion, oh, this is only a disguise for class interest, disguise for racial interest, disguise for gender politics. If you're so well defended, you will never learn anything new. How can you? You've destroyed it before it can even begin to speak to you. So you have to take the chance of being wrong. I'll stop with this. I'll finish with this. I think this is a lovely quotation from somebody called W.K.C. Guthrie in a book called The Greek Philosophers from 1960. Theos, the Greek word which we have in mind when we speak of God, has a primarily predictive force. That is to say, the Greeks do not, as the Christians or Jews do, first assert the existence of God, and then to proceed to enumerate his attributes, saying, God is good, God is love, and so forth. Rather, the Greeks were so impressed or awed by the things in life or nature that were remarkable, either for joy or fear, that when that happened, they said, this is a God, or that is a God. By saying that love or victory is God, or to be more accurate, a God, was meant first and foremost that it was more than human. It wasn't inhuman. It included human realities and emotions and perceptions, but it was more than that. It exceeded the human. Okay? Any power, any force we see at work in the world, that's an interesting phrase, by the way, because that's the definition of the Holy Spirit, God at work in the world. Any force or power we see at work in the world which is not born with us and will continue after we are gone could therefore be called a God, and most of them were. And I think art works in something similar way to that. Okay, thank you.